What happens when a YouTuber pushes a royal guard too far? Welcome to the channel, everyone. We're so excited to have you here today. Before we dive into today's incredible story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and tell us which part of the world you're tuning in from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on tomorrow's special story that will leave you thinking long after it ends. Get ready, because the adventure starts now. It was a crisp afternoon in London, with a sky dotted by wisps of clouds, the kind of day that always seemed to draw tourists to Buckingham Palace. The gleaming wrought iron gate stood tall, reflecting the sunlight, creating a radiant contrast against the deep, rich red of the royal guard's scarlet tunics. These men, with their towering bearskin hats and stoic, motionless stances, appeared more like statues than living beings. For most visitors, their stillness was mesmerizing, almost sacred in its precision. The guards didn't twitch, blink, or move a muscle, embodying the highest form of discipline. To them, the outside world, with its noise, chaos, and bustling crowd, was nothing but a distant murmur. The entire world seemed to fade away when they stood in their positions, a silent monument of dedication. But for one man, one visitor, this discipline was the perfect challenge. Enter Jrex Harrison, a 28-year-old American YouTuber with a reputation for stirring up trouble wherever he went, clad in designer joggers patterned with the American flag, a bomber jacket adorned with sponsorship logos, and a pair of aviator sunglasses that screamed, "Look at me." Jrex was everything the Royal Guard was not. His presence was loud, unmissable, and full of swagger. He wasn't here to admire the history or the tradition of the palace. He was here for one thing and one thing only: to create chaos, to test the limits, and to capture it all on his live stream. As Jrex strutted through the crowd, his two crew members followed, one with a shoulder-mounted camera, the other handling audio. His phone was already out, streaming live to thousands of viewers, his voice booming through the air. Yo, what's up, Jrex Nation? We're out here at Buckingham freaking Palace, baby, he shouted, spinning in place for dramatic effect. Time to meet the British statues in funny hats. Let's see if they're real or just wax figures in cosplay. The comment section exploded with laughing emojis, flame icons, and an overwhelming amount of anticipation. His fanbase, familiar with his antics, was fully prepared for whatever he was about to do. They had seen him get kicked out of museums, scolded by the police, and chased by monks. For Jrex, this was just another day in the life of a prankster. But for the unsuspecting guards, it would soon become an ordeal. Jrex wasn't just pulling off another prank for his fans. This was a test, a personal challenge to see how far he could push the boundaries before the system snapped, before the mask cracked. He headed straight for the guard stationed near the southwest corner of the courtyard, his eyes gleaming with mischief. The guard, Sergeant Ryan Thomas, stood like a towering figure of stone. He was tall, immobile, his rifle perfectly upright. In his hands, his chin was level, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his bearskin hat. To Jrex, the guard looked like an object, a mere prop, a living statue for his entertainment. Perfect, Jrex muttered to himself. This one's tall. He'll look great in the thumbnail when I make him twitch. He circled the guard slowly, narrating for his live stream. Legend says these guys can't talk, can't laugh, can't punch, so let's put that to the test, shall we? He leaned in close, making loud, obnoxious Kissy noises just inches away from the guard's ear. There was no reaction. Jrex danced around him, waving his arms and even dropping to the ground in fake convulsions. Nothing. The guard stood there, perfectly still, his eyes unwavering. The crowd began to gather, drawn by the unusual spectacle. Yo, he's good, Jrex said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead for dramatic effect. Real good? But I've broken statues tougher than this. The crowd, captivated by the tension, watched with bated breath as Jrex pressed on, pushing the boundaries further, completely oblivious to the line he was about to cross. And that, in essence, was the beginning of a test of limits, not just for Jrex, but for Sergeant Thomas as well. A test that would soon push the guard to break his silence, his discipline, and prove that even the most composed soldiers have a breaking point. What happened next would not only change the course of Jrex's day, but would turn the quiet guard into a global hero. As Jrex continued his antics, the crowd grew larger, drawn in by his boldness and the unusual confrontation. The air was thick with anticipation as people watched, some with amusement, others with discomfort. Jrex, ever the showman, wasn't fazed. His confidence only grew as the guard, Sergeant Ryan Thomas, remained as still as stone, his eyes hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, unmoved by any of the taunts, the bizarre antics, or the growing crowd around him. Jrex leaned in closer, his breath hot against the back of the guard's neck, taunting him further, trying to get a reaction. "Come on, buddy," Jrex smirked. "Don't be shy. I'm just trying to see if you're real. If you even feel anything, huh?" The crowd held its collective breath, not a single twitch from the guard. The tension mounted, but it was clear that Jrex wasn't satisfied with just a few stares or funny looks. He wanted more. He wanted to break the illusion, shatter the silence, and prove to the world that the Royal Guard wasn't as invincible as they seemed. To him, the guard wasn't a soldier. He was just another piece of his viral content. Okay, Jrex said, his voice laced with mock admiration. "This guy's a professional, but even statues crack under pressure, right?" He laughed, spinning around dramatically, holding up his phone to the camera, narrating the unfolding scene for his growing online audience. "Jrex Nation, get ready for the best prank ever." But this was no prank anymore. This was a test of limits, a challenge that Jrex was about to push far beyond the boundary of respect, something he hadn't fully considered when he first approached the guard. The old woman in the crowd with her polite British accent had stepped forward earlier, urging him to stop. "Please, young man," she said softly. "Show some respect. He's not an actor." But Jrex had waved her off, dismissing her plea as just another boring comment from someone who didn't understand the new era of entertainment. With a smug grin, he looked back at the woman and said, "Lady, this is the internet. Respect doesn't get views, reactions do." His tone was brash, almost arrogant, as he turned back to the guard, pushing his luck even further. He took a step closer, so close now that he could practically feel the heat radiating from the soldier's stiff, upright posture. Jrex's voice dropped an octave, becoming more playful as he readied himself to cross the line, physically, morally, and culturally. He wasn't just challenging a soldier now. He was pushing against something far greater, a century-old symbol of discipline, honor, and tradition. Without thinking, Jrex reached out, tapping the guard's tall, bearskin hat with his fingers. It was a small, dismissive flick, but it was enough to test the limits. Nothing. No movement. The guard remained still. Jrex's smirk grew wider. "Ha! He's not even flinching. You've got to be kidding me." The crowd was watching now, wide-eyed, as the tension grew heavier in the air. But as Jrex stepped back, eyes gleaming, he knew he was about to take this further. The audience was hungry for more, the comments flooding in, urging him to do something bigger, bolder. And then, without warning, Jrex crossed that line, literally. He stepped over the clearly marked boundary, encroaching on the sacred space of the Royal Guard. The moment the crowd saw this, there was a collective gasp. Some people instinctively grabbed their phones, eager to capture what they sensed was about to unfold. The stillness of the moment hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the chaos Jrex had been stirring. Sergeant Thomas, who had remained perfectly composed through all the mockery and the taunts, shifted imperceptibly. His eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his hat, were sharp, focused. The tension in his stance tightened. His grip on the rifle subtly adjusted. He was ready. The moment had arrived. Jrex had no idea that crossing that boundary wasn't just a violation of protocol. It was a moment where discipline, military training, and honor were all about to come into play. Sergeant Thomas, having been through battlefields far more intense than any prank, stood unwavering, waiting for the moment when action was necessary. The crowd could feel it now. Something was about to break, but it wasn't the soldier. It was the boundary between showmanship and respect, between chaos and order. And Jrex, for all his bravado, had no idea that this was the moment when the Queen's Guard would shift from a silent figure of discipline to a living embodiment of military precision and control. Jrex stepped closer, not realizing that he was about to learn the hard way just how far a man could be pushed before he broke. The moment Jrex stepped over the line, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd, which had been entertained by his antics, suddenly seemed to hold its collective breath. There was a palpable tension now, as if the very air had thickened with anticipation. Jrex, still confident in his defiance, turned back to face the guard, his smile wide and taunting. But now there was a subtle shift in his tone, as if he had started to realize the gravity of what he was doing. The guard, Sergeant Ryan Thomas, still stood perfectly still, as though nothing had changed. But in that stillness, Jrex felt something flicker, something more than just a soldier waiting for orders. The guard's presence had shifted from passive discipline to something much more dangerous. Jrex had pushed too far. "Yo, man, are you even real?" Jrex sneered, leaning in closer, trying to provoke a reaction. "Or is this just some statue they stuck out here for tourists? No way you're real, right?" His voice was dripping, with sarcasm, but the playful edge was starting to slip. He was dangerously close to the guard now. So close he could hear the faint rustle of the soldier's uniform, feel the heat of the day mingling with the cold intensity emanating from Sergeant Mess. The crowd, once amused, now seemed nervous. Whispers began to ripple through the group, and a few people took a step back, sensing that things were escalating. But Jrex was too far gone, locked in his own sense of superiority. He wasn't just messing around anymore. He was testing the limits, pushing to see how far he could go before the soldier snapped. And that's when he made his first mistake. He touched the guard. Not a tap or a light brush, but a flick of the fingers against the edge of the guard's bearskin hat. Nothing. Jrex chuckled, thinking this was still some kind of game, his ego swelling as the guard stood motionless. "Wow, you're good," he said, wiping his forehead dramatically. "But not good enough to beat me, right?" But the audience could feel it too. The tension was now unmistakable. Something wasn't right. People were starting to gather their phones, not just to film, but to capture a moment that felt like history. A crowd of onlookers had circled, forming a loose barrier around Jrex and the guard. Jrex, ignoring the signs, pressed on. He moved behind the guard now, circling like a predator. Then, with one last mocking gesture, he clapped his hands loudly right next to the guard's ears. Still nothing. The air seemed to crackle with expectation. "Impressive," Jrex muttered. "But even statues crack under pressure." He grinned, raising his phone to capture the moment for his stream. But that was the moment when Sergeant Thomas moved. With precision that could only be born from years of training, the soldier pivoted. His boots slammed into the ground with military precision, his posture straightening in an instant. The crowd froze. Jrex didn't know it yet, but he had crossed a line that no longer had anything to do with a prank or a viral moment. This was real now, and the guard had stepped forward to make that clear. "Step back," the guard's voice cut through the tension, deep and commanding, the kind of voice that immediately silenced any doubt. It wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of authority. The crowd's murmurs quieted to a hush as Jrex, still holding his phone, took a few steps back, surprised by the shift in tone. He hadn't expected this. His smirk faltered for the first time. "Oh, wow," Jrex said nervously, his voice betraying the first hint of hesitation. "You speak? I didn't think you could talk, man. It's all just for show, right?" But Sergeant Thomas didn't flinch. His posture hadn't softened. His rifle still held steady at his side. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was something far more dangerous, control. He had spoken, yes, but only because it was time. Time for Jrex to realize that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. And that was when the moment of truth came. Jrex, trapped by the crowd and the soldiers' presence, tried to push forward again. His voice was dripping with sarcasm now. "Oh, come on, you're not going to do anything. You're just going to stand there and look tough?" In that instant, Jrex pushed again, this time not with words, but with his hands. He shoved the guard's shoulder, a full-bodied push meant to humiliate him, to prove that the guard's discipline meant nothing in the face of Jrex's bravado. But it was a mistake, a grave mistake. Sergeant Thomas didn't hesitate. Yatai. One swift motion. He moved in, his body fluid and precise, locking Jrex's arm in a controlled joint hold that brought the YouTuber crashing to the ground. The crowd gasped as Jrex yelped in surprise, the phone slipping from his hand, the camera tumbling to the ground. His world spun as he hit the cold stone pavement, his arm twisted behind his back, his face pressed into the ground. "You have assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard." The guard's voice rang out, calm and steady, as he knelt beside Jrex. "You will remain on the ground until security arrives." The moment that had started as a viral prank, a challenge to break a statue of a man in uniform, had quickly transformed into something much larger. The crowd, stunned into silence, watched as the soldier, trained for much worse, restrained Jrex, not with anger, but with military precision and control. And as the palace security arrived, Jrex squirmed, his defiance quickly evaporating into a whispered plea. But it was too late. The line had been crossed and the world was watching, not just to see a prank but to witness the power of restraint, the strength of duty, and the silent strength of the Queen's Guard. The world seemed to slow down as Jrex lay face down on the cold stone pavement, his arm twisted behind his back, in a hold that was as efficient as it was undeniable. The crowd, once buzzing with laughter and excitement, was now eerily silent. Some were in shock, others in awe, but all eyes were locked on the scene unfolding before them. Jrex, the loud, proud YouTuber who had come to Buckingham Palace to stir up chaos, was now caught in the very moment he had pushed too far. Sergeant Thomas, his posture as unyielding as ever, maintained his control with the precision of a trained soldier. He wasn't angry, not even upset. He was simply doing his job. His voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the thickening silence. "You have assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard. You will remain on the ground until security arrives." The words hung in the air, their weight heavier than any physical blow. Jrex's mind raced, his thoughts scrambling to find a way out of the situation, but it was too late. This wasn't just a prank anymore. He had crossed a line, and there would be no viral moment to save him now. He squirmed beneath the soldier's grip, trying to twist his arm free, but Sergeant Thomas's hold was unrelenting. Every movement felt like an echo of the military training that had brought the guard to this moment. This was restraint. This was discipline. This was control. The camera crew, once focused on capturing Jrex's every move, now stood frozen, their own phones pointed in disbelief. The live stream, still running, showed Jrex's face contorted in frustration as he tried to twist his arm free. The comments flooded in, a mix of shock, disbelief, and admiration for the guard. "A Jrex nation," one comment read. "You're done, man. You messed with the wrong dude." Others followed suit, sending messages of support for Sergeant Thomas, calling him a hero, praising his restraint. The situation seemed to escalate with every passing second. Jrex, his pride now shattered, realized he had underestimated just how far he could push the boundaries of respect. The guard, whom he had mocked and belittled, was no longer a statue in a funny hat. He was a soldier, a man who had served on the front lines, who had seen and done things Jrex could never imagine. And now, that same soldier was standing between Jrex and the viral content he had hoped to achieve. The sound of polished boots echoed through the courtyard as palace security rushed in. Two officers in dark uniform swiftly moved to Jrex's side, snapping restraints onto his wrists with practiced ease. The crowd, initially tense, began to murmur again, some applauding, some whispering in disbelief, others simply watching. As the scene unfolded, it was no longer about the prank. It was about something much bigger. Jrex's sunglasses had fallen off, cracked on the pavement beside him. His designer jacket was scuffed, the symbol of his arrogance now a stark contrast to the reality of the situation. "Yo, chill, bro," Jrex mumbled, his voice now smaller, quieter, almost pleading. "It's a prank, man, a prank." His usual bravado was gone, replaced by the realization that there was no way out. He had pushed too far, and now the consequences were real. But Sergeant Thomas didn't respond. He didn't need to. His job was done. He had acted with precision and control, as he was trained to do. He wasn't there to entertain or engage with the chaos Jrex had created. He was there to uphold the dignity of the Queen's Guard, to stand firm in the face of mockery and disrespect, and when the moment came, to act without hesitation. And that was exactly what he did. As Jrex was lifted to his feet by the palace, security officers, he looked around at the crowd, his face red with frustration and embarrassment. The once captivated tourists now stood with their phones raised, capturing the final, humiliating moments of Jrex's viral failure. The live stream was still going, the comment section exploding with reactions. But none of them were the ones Jrex had hoped for. The hashtag #RoyalGuardHero began trending, overshadowing the once popular Jrex Nation. Sergeant Thomas, with a simple nod to the officers, stepped back into his position. The chaos had subsided, the crowd slowly dispersing, but the guard remained. His rifle once again at his side, his body still and unwavering. To the untrained eye, it seemed like nothing had changed. But those who knew better understood the truth. The guard hadn't reset. He hadn't gone back to a statue-like existence. He had simply given Jrex one last chance, a chance to realize that there are some lines you can't cross, some pranks that go too far, and some people you just don't mess with. The crowd, now fully aware of what had just transpired, began to applaud, their cheers resonating through the courtyard. Some tourists clapped in admiration for the guard's calm, others in awe of the way he had handled the situation with military precision. But no applause was as loud as the one Jrex's. Humiliation would echo in his mind as he sat in the holding cell, watching the storm he had unwittingly created unfold on his screen. The comment section exploded with new posts, praising the guard's composure and questioning the true nature of bravery. Sergeant Thomas, standing tall and silent, had not only protected the dignity of his post, he had unknowingly become the hero in a story no one had expected. As Jrex was escorted away by palace security, the scene that had unfolded just moments before seemed to shift into something else entirely. The viral prank, the chaos he had so carefully planned, had turned into his worst nightmare. The once boisterous YouTuber, full of confidence and swagger, now sat in the back of a blacked-out van, handcuffed, his designer jacket dirty and scuffed. His phone was a blur of angry comments and notifications. His live stream had turned from thousands of cheering fans to a flood of mocking comments and hashtags he had never expected to see. Royal Guard Hero was now trending worldwide, a label Jrex never saw coming. The videos were everywhere, spreading faster than wildfire. Clips of his humiliating fall were being shared across social media, garnering millions of views in a matter of hours. The crowd had applauded the guard, Sergeant Ryan Thomas, for his calmness, his military precision in dealing with the situation. The very same guard Jrex had taunted, mocked, and pushed to the edge had become a symbol of unwavering discipline and respect. To the people who had witnessed the event, the guard had not only protected his post, but had elevated the role of the Queen's Guard to something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The stoic, silent figure in the scarlet tunic had become a living legend overnight. Back at the palace, Sergeant Thomas returned to his position, his boots clicking against the stone pavement. The spectacle that had unfolded in front of thousands of tourists, the cameras, and the live stream had faded into history. But for him, it was just another day on duty. He wasn't a hero in his own mind. He was simply a soldier who followed the protocol, who had done his job. And, as he stood once again as a monument of discipline, he knew that his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The real heroism wasn't in the attention he now garnered, but in the restraint he had shown when provoked. He had done exactly what he had been trained to do. Meanwhile, Jrex, still in the back of the van, was feeling the weight of the consequences. His phone buzzed relentlessly, the notifications blurring together as he scrolled through the overwhelming flood of comments. Some were mocking, some were sarcastic, but many others were harshly critical. He couldn't believe what was happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't the viral sensation he had planned for. He had underestimated the power of discipline, the unshakable presence of a soldier who had seen far worse than anything his pranks could conjure. The incident became the talk of every social media platform. Memes flooded the internet, most of them turning Jrex into the punchline of a joke he never saw coming. One image in particular stood out, a split-screen meme showing Jrex's smirking face, contrasted with Sergeant Thomas standing stoically in his guard uniform. The caption read, "When you challenge a statue, but it turns out to be a soldier." But the consequences didn't end there. The British Ministry of Defence issued a brief statement the following day. The Royal Guard involved in today's incident followed all appropriate protocols. No further action will be taken. The Guard remains on active ceremonial duty. In other words, the incident was over for them. But for Jrex, it had just begun. As the hours passed, more details about Sergeant Thomas's past surfaced online. A video from an old interview appeared on social media. Sergeant Thomas in full combat gear, rescuing civilians from a destroyed convoy in Afghanistan. The clip went viral. People began sharing it, their admiration for the Guard growing. "This man's been a hero long before TikTok knew his name," one comment read. "From battlefield to Buckingham, same courage, different war." Jrex sat in his holding cell, scrolling through his phone, his initial bravado and arrogance now replaced with a grim silence. He wasn't just watching his social media empire crumble. He was watching a soldier who had never sought the spotlight become a symbol of everything Jrex had hoped to be. The comments were no longer filled with the praise of his pranks. They were filled with admiration for a man who had stood silently in the face of mockery and ridicule, only to turn the tables with a single action. By nightfall, the Machiar Royal Guard hashtag was still trending, dominating Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The world was now obsessed with Sergeant Thomas, the silent man who had become the face of dignity, control, and strength. Meanwhile, Jrex's account was flooded with criticisms, some from fans who felt betrayed, others from people who had no idea who he was, but had seen enough to know that his actions had crossed a line. As Jrex scrolled through the endless notifications, the weight of his choices finally hit him. He had come to Buckingham Palace seeking chaos, but what he had found instead was something far more powerful, something that would change the course of his career forever. Sergeant Thomas hadn't just protected his post. He had, in a moment of restraint and discipline, protected the very concept of respect itself. In that moment, as the online world celebrated Sergeant Thomas's calm under pressure, Jrex realized that some things are bigger than fame, bigger than viral content. Some things, like honor and discipline, stand the test of time, and they were the very things he had tried and failed to break. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's story. Do you think Jrex went too far with his prank, or was the Royal Guard's response justified? This incident raised so many important questions about respect, discipline, and the consequences of pushing boundaries, and we want to know what you think. What would you have done if you were in the crowd that day? Would you have supported the Guard's actions, or do you believe Jrex was simply having fun? Do you think social media pranks are harmless, or do they cross a line? Share your opinions, personal experiences, or even your thoughts on how things could have turned out differently. We also want to hear from you. How do you think moments like these impact our understanding of tradition, authority, and respect? In today's world, feel free to dive into this conversation and leave your comment below. Your insights could help others think differently about the situation, and we value every perspective. And remember, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join us for more thought-provoking stories every week. Let's keep the conversation going. Your voice matters here.